Welcome to this episode of AEC Perspectives. Today, we're thrilled to have RS&H's Chief Financial Officer, Amy Davis, on the podcast to talk about employee ownership at RS&H. Employee ownership is a bedrock principle at RS&H, and through our conversation, we'll highlight the unique benefits and opportunities and how employee ownership empowers our team. Welcome, Amy, to the podcast. It's great to have you on today.
Well, thank you, Rachel. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm excited, and I bet our listeners are too, to learn about this. So first, let's kind of start with origins. Can you walk us through the evolution of RS&H's employee ownership journey?
Sure. It's such a storied organization, and really how it came to be from an employee ownership perspective, I think is really interesting. And it's gone through its peaks and valleys to really where we're at today and what we're trying to create for the future. So really excited about it. RS&H was founded in 1941 by two engineers and an architect, and it was a privately held company for many, many years. And back up into the 1980s, it was purchased majority stake by another private company. And the goals of that acquire ultimately over the next several years, it was clear that they were not the same as the current ownership or leaders of the company. And so in 1990, a group of those legacy leaders bought the company back with their own debt. And they retired that debt a few years later. But through that whole process, they really coalesced around the fact that employee ownership was a bedrock principle and it would remain that way. They saw what it was prior to that outside investment. They recognized why that didn't go well for them or their employees or their mission. And when they bought it back, they were intent on ensuring that employee ownership stayed around for as long as they were around, right? And so their goal was really to create a program that not only transitioned from them to the next generation, but then that generation, what was its responsibility to figure out how to generate, to transfer after that. And in 2017, 2018, our current CEO, who's been the CEO now for a little bit over 9 years, he went about with the board and other leaders of the organization to formalize the plan around our employee ownership program and to document, create that predictability, this transparency for our employee owners on how they can become employee owners, what's expected of them, and how they ultimately transition as they move on from the company in retirement or in other ways. And we really wanted to ensure that we started to put the framework around that employee ownership program that set the stage for broad ownership in the future. At the time when they were doing this, it wasn't as broad as it is today, which we're going to talk about. But how do they broaden it? And then how do they sustain it for generation to generation? And every generation has its own task of making sure they understand how they are part of that transition to the next generation. And so that's been, our journey in the last several years. We've been taking that kind of refreshed framework from 2017, 2018 and expanding upon it. And we've invited over 200% new employees every year to our annual stock offering, which is the primary way that you become a direct owner in the company. And that has culminated into this year being the first year that we're offering all 1,600 plus employees the opportunity to participate in our annual stock offering and become a direct owner themselves in the journey. And so that's just been a really amazing journey to be a part of, and to see, when I go around to offices and do office tours and talk to our associates and I listen to stories, and it just gives me goosebumps to even say it, but when I listen to stories of people who have worked so hard for the company for so many years and they knew the employee ownership was important and they've seen that, but it was always not at a depth that maybe they were the next up to be invited. And when over the last several years, as some of those employees have been invited, the stories that I get, been here 15 years, have been saving for this, was hoping I would eventually be asked. And it's just such a really powerful and frankly emotional part of what I have the privilege of listening to and being a part of molding for our firm going forward. And it's an exciting time. So employee ownership for us has really gone from employee owned to begin in 1941 to we saw what it was like to be purchased by someone else, bought it back, and have committed ourselves to ensuring that we remain employee owned, into the future.
I really appreciate that you brought up too that you're listening to the employees and that you mentioned this isn't just a business transaction or a
Mhm.
decision. When you're bringing your whole self to a place for 40 plus hours a week, that's over
Mhm.
half your waking hours every week. And yeah, there's going to be that investment of like, you feel strongly about, where you're spending that time and being able to now have that tangible investment with the company, with the place that you're choosing to spend that time each week has to mean a lot to these employees.
It does. It really does. And I think that, if you've worked at different places, we have such a wonderful company that we have a lot of legacy employees who have worked here a very, very long time. And some of them have been employee owners for a long time, and a lot of them have not.
Mhm.
So we've got that mix of legacy, and we've got new who have come from other different companies or other different employee ownership types, or just ownership types in general, not even employee ownership, like public companies, et cetera. So it's really when you recognize how unique it is, I think that it creates an even broader strength to our value prop is what I would say. Being at RS&H, what it means to be here, it becomes more than just a financial transaction, which, obviously there are those that is there, right? That is a benefit of employee ownership that people get to participate in, but it's really broader than that. And the value that um, employee ownership brings, both quantitative and qualitative, is really what I think is so exciting, and people feel it. It's really it's an emotion. It truly is an emotion.
Well, you touched on something just now too that I definitely want to ask you about because
Mhm.
I think this could be an opportunity to educate us on what kind of company ownerships are out there. Like that really can help paint the picture for us why this is so different. Can you tell us about how employee ownership, how that program differs from other types of ownership?
Sure. So I think there's tons of different ownership structures out there, but the ones that people are most familiar with, you're going to have public companies, right? So your Microsoft, your Apples, all of those types of companies that we hear about, we think about on the S&P 500, we can invest in ourselves, and they're very successful businesses, right? And so there's, me explaining this throws no shade on them whatsoever, but there is a reality that how they are different to our employee ownership program. In public companies, they aren't necessarily employees, the people who own the business, right? As a matter of fact, most of them are probably not employees. And that cycle in a public company is really built around those quarterly investor calls. And they do take long-term views, right? These are very successful, long, prosperous companies, many of them. But that short-term cycle, I think, does hinder their ability to really take that long view on certain parts of their business and certain risks or bets they want to take, because they are kind of beholden to that quarterly cycle and answering to people who aren't employees, right? So maybe what's best for the investor, maybe not so much the internal employee. That's one way. There's private equity. And private equity is actually very active in our AEC space today, the market, the industry that we're in. And that's just because they're really great investors, and they are looking at our industry. There's no shortage of needs in our industry. Everyone knows what infrastructure report card we have as a nation, and the needs that are out there, and so many different avenues that we play in. There's available funding for those services, right? Both sides of the aisle support that funding and know that it's important, and have been funding it. And there's real quality of those cash flows. So there's really little risk in being paid for those services. So when private equity sees all of those great things, right, they're attracted to our space. And what they do is they have outside investors, right, who are giving them dollars. They're raising funds, and they've got to put that capital to use. And so they've got to look for ways to invest, right? And they have figured out that this industry, buying up companies like ours, smaller or bigger than RS&H, and putting those companies together, right, means those companies as a combined entity are more valuable in the market than a standalone company. So they're rolling up those revenues, and creating by scale more value. And that's great for their outside investors, right? Their investors are looking for that return. And those private equity entities normally give you only a 3 to 7 year to return back to them the money that they've borrowed at a guaranteed rate. So, the private equity cycle is short term in nature. They're buying up these companies with those funds that they have from their investors. They are creating that top line value just because they're getting bigger and there's value in scale. And they're also looking at efficiencies at the same time. They're looking at bottom line impacts to grow their profit numbers. So all of that sounds wonderful, right? But it's short term in nature. It may not be, I'm going to generalize here because they do some really wonderful things, private equity and being able to invest in companies. But they tend to be looking for that short term profit to return to their investor, not that future forward look for its employees. So very different experience in that world, though they do great for their investors. And that's, a whole part of the business that's important for them and their investors. And then I'd say the last ownership model that is really out there is employee ownership, pure employee ownership. But it's very different. It's very common in our industry, in the AEC industry, but it is completely different in every company. Most of the employee ownership that you see in the AEC space is more thinly held. It's not broad employee ownership. So it's shallow ownership. And that depends, there could be 5 owners, there could be 500, but it normally isn't 100% of everyone directly owning in the business. And that is really, what happens in those thinly held employee-owned companies is, they have wonderful owners that over time have created, along with their employees, incredible value. And the value then that those owners have needs to be transitioned. And because it's not broadly owned, they don't have the ability to pass on their ownership when they go to retire, to sell their ownership at the current value. There's no financial bandwidth. There's no one who can afford to do that. And so a lot of times what happens, because they don't have the next owner ready to step in and continue to purchase in the company to buy those transitioning owners out, is it results in a sale or having another investor come in and put a big stake in, like we saw in our history back in 1980 when we had the stake that came into the company. So that creates a situation that I think isn't really where we want to be.
Right.
I know it's not where we want to be. And that's why we've been really intentional about broadening our ownership, because our goal is to ensure that we have long-term sustainable employee ownership. We really believe very strongly that employee ownership is about charting our own course, not someone else's. And we want to do what's best for our employees, our communities, and our clients. And we can only do that, in our opinion, if we're driving our own ship. And so we're steering our own ship. So that's really why we're expanding. And this year being the first year that we do that 100% is really an exciting time.
It sounds exciting. And particularly, as you mentioned earlier, the journey to get here and really all of it culminating to you all have pieced this together to say what's going to be the most meaningful way to approach this. And it sounds like you really are taking that tack. And I have a feeling anyone listening to this who's an associate might be like thinking, okay, this sounds great. What are those, if you could tell us, what are those key benefits of employee ownership from their perspective and associates perspective that you'd love to highlight for them? What does this mean for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that there are 100 benefits, whether it's you're talking about what are the benefits to our clients, what are the benefits to our communities, whether it's our employee-owned company or other employee-owned companies. When I really think about what are the benefits to our associates, it's really more than financial. That's the first one that people touch on, right? And I'm a numbers person, so I will talk about the numbers all day long and recognize that I get so excited to know that the employees in our firm can financially benefit and create their own generational wealth. I just think that is, where do you have that opportunity to do that, right? To truly buy into your company and own a meaningful stake, and to know that that company, every dollar that it spends and then it generates a return on, you are somehow sharing in as an employee owner versus just getting a paycheck or just getting a paycheck and a bonus. It is broader than that. It's deeper than that. It's more meaningful than that. So I think the first thing I would say is it enhances really personal wealth, which I think enhances job satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
which increases, I think, motivation, right? And so when you know all of your efforts are directly, and the efforts of your colleagues are all collectively going towards the same outcomes, right? And those outcomes create a reward that you all share in. I think that really changes even the culture of what you show up every day to do and who you do it with. And I think that's a big part of people really loving their job. I think having a voice in the firm really is another great way for employees to feel value in what they do every day. They focus their time and their energy really on the outcomes that benefit the whole organization, which leads to better decision making, right? And more collaboration and higher engagement, right? So you're not just coming to a job. And I think that's a big part of, what is an associate's benefit is, of course, financial, but it's all of those qualitative things that culminate to the quantitative, which is really the financial benefit, because you have such a well-run, motivated, collaborative, future-focused, accountable organization that you're in then, right? That's the environment that you live in, and you recognize that you're benefiting from those decisions, right? And that belief system. We're not making decisions just to pay the top 1% of management. We're
Mm-hmm.
making decisions. I get rewarded the same way on the stock that I own as a first level associate who just graduated college and came into the organization and had an opportunity to buy in and purchase the company. So I think that, those are the ways that associates really can benefit. I think that all creates pride in something. They belong. It's a really inclusive culture in that, not just in what you hear, externally and what inclusivity means, but you're all owners. You're all a part of something. It creates really a thriving and motivated workforce, in my opinion, and from what I've seen. And that's why I think that people really they gravitate towards it. And that's why I say it's an emotion as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, these are just incredibly smart people who work at RS&H, and what we do for a living is so incredibly important to our communities. And that in itself creates pride, right? We're really proud of what we do. And now we're really proud of what we do and how we get to reward our people for what they do and how they do it, how they show up every day, is really exciting.
Well, and that refers back as well when you were describing to us the different kinds of companies, and especially I'm going to touch on the private equity one where you said, they do come in, and again, great intentions, great outcomes can happen, but it is a little bit more short-term thinking where and it can be very easy in that environment for employees of that kind of ownership to feel the same, where it's like, well, this is, I don't have a long-term investment here because they don't, or it can be very easy to fall into that culture of thinking. And you just described, and I loved some of the adjectives you were throwing out, describing the culture at RS&H. So what are some other adjectives, like if you could further describe like how this employee ownership influences the actual day-to-day, the vibes, the
Mhm.
company culture at RS&H, how else would you describe that?
Yes. So I think so I'll take it a few different ways. The first way is a selfish way from a chief financial officer is when we talk about caring about where we spend our money, right? In some organizations, and it doesn't happen perfectly in ours. Like let me just say it doesn't. But in some organizations, all they hear is want, want, want. The CFO talking about money, taking money from me, dropping it to the bottom line. Now they're taking away, X and Y, and, just squeezing us as much as they possibly can. And we really, and I think that is that's hard for any finance exec to really get their people to understand that maybe they are getting squeezed in some companies, but a lot of times what those finance execs are trying to do is really make sure that the dollars they're spending are being spent in the right places to create value. but that value is being created for who,
Hmm.
right? And so that's where it changes here. So when we talk about how do we spend our dollars? Every dollar we spend, act like it's your own. How do you spend that? How do we know that when we spend that, it's developing our people, it's developing our clients and the work that we can do, it's broadening the scope of what we can do, and that we want to make sure we're investing our dollars so that they're creating additional growth opportunities, they're creating additional profit opportunities in the future. And it's really a snowball effect, right? If you're doing that really well and you're really paying attention to what you're doing, you are creating value. And that value now isn't just like, oh, great, I don't get to go on X trip or go to X conference because they need more money so that the executives get paid more. That's just not the case. Here, it's if we're taking those dollars because we found that something wasn't as effective as it needed to be, reinvesting it in the company into an area that can continue to create that long-term value, we're now sharing that back with you. And so you think different now. You really think like an owner. You don't think like I need to go tell you how we need to control our finances, but it talks about how finances really change the value of the company, and therefore you contribute. So, I think that that is just a whole nother mindset that makes my job easier. And I love that. So thank you. I love that part about it because it's really a hard part of the job. But I think that another way that, when I think about a culture here, I think of committed. I think we are very committed. I talked about legacy employees. We have a lot of legacy employees. They're very proud. And they've created an amazing company. And we have a lot of new employees, right? We are a professional services firm. So we need to grow and continue to grow and bring on those professionals so we can continue to expand the scope of work that we can do around the country, right? And ultimately the world. And so I think committed is a great adjective from a culture perspective. High performing. I
Hmm.
think we are competitive and high performing. And I love that. I love that we want to win and we want to do it the right way. And we know that winning creates value, right? So we know that, right? And it's a great thing for all of our employees. Collaborative, again, when you're looking to the left and right and your colleagues all are benefiting just like you hold yourselves accountable to each other and to yourself. You hold our leaders accountable. And I think that's a great thing, right? It's kind of a self-sustaining culture where everyone is thinking and acting like an owner. And that's hard, I think, when you just say to someone, act like an owner, but they're not, or they have such little holdings or little ability to really invest in an organization. Thinking like an owner is just not, a word that's going to resonate really well with employees. So I think that's one of the things from a culture perspective. Future focused,
Hmm.
right? So really thinking about who do we want to be and putting no limits on that, because we can take that long view, and we do. And I think from a culture perspective, when I say we're high performing and competitive and incredibly intelligent and talented, is that having this added benefit of 100% employee ownership that people can participate in is a place that we want to be. That place, we want to be the place that RS&H wants to be, a place that people um, they seek us out to be employed here and to be an owner here and to participate in what we have to offer. And so when you can take an organization and you not only can attract that top talent, but you can retain it. I mean, just imagine what you can do then with that, right? So, I think that's really a powerful thing as well, is just being being an organization where people want to be. They're seeking you out, and you have what people want is, just really a great feeling for our employees, and ultimately our clients feel it. And then our communities ultimately feel it, right? The communities that we work in and live in every day.
Yeah, you're right. It just has that ripple effect. And speaking particularly to somebody, I mean, you're thinking of you're an employee, you might be an individual contributor, an associate at this company, but you're always wondering who's working around you. Nobody works in a silo, no one person is an island, but you are going to care about like what kind of talent are we attracting, and is, as you mentioned, kind of looking in that circle around you, is that person next to me caring as much
Mhm.
about what we're trying to accomplish every day as I am? And you really are, through employee ownership, ensuring that yes, there is that aspect of that they can care as much, and there's that same level of investment across the board among each employee, which leads me to, I have a bit of a rapid fire question for you,
Oh, okay.
just to take something off the top of your head here.
Okay. Okay.
At RS&H, the brand essence is driven to care. What
Mm.
does that phrase mean to you?
It means that, okay, let me say I'll say the it's not a tagline because it's not really a tagline, but it means that we care for our clients, our communities, and each other every day. Okay, that sounds, of course you did, right? Driven to care. That's of course it sounds like what it's supposed to be. I think it means how we show up every day to work with each other. We expect a lot from ourselves and each other, and we do that in a respectful way. We care about people personally and professionally. We hold ourselves accountable. We do that in a respectful way. We are high performing, right? So we don't, being driven to care doesn't mean that, to say this, it doesn't mean it's a weakness. It's not weak. It's actually incredibly strong in who we are every day as we show up. It's making a decision that might be difficult for a small group of people, but it's better for the whole because we're driven to care for everybody, and it's not siloed. And so I think about it in those terms. I think other people probably about it differently. We care about, of course, we care about mental well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being, and we provide, programs around all of those things, and that's a part of who we are, right? We encourage, collaboration in and outside of the offices, in the company and in our communities, giving back, all driven to care. But I think it really, for me, it means that we hold ourselves to the highest standards, and we do that in a way that is respectful and encouraging, inclusive, but it's really to bring out the best in everything we do, whether that's in our employees and in their personal and professional life, whether that's in the community that we're serving or the clients' projects that we're working on. We get excited for, I think about the impact, the economic impact of what we just do in our industry alone. People don't, step back how prideful.
Mm.
We're building a bridge, and some might say, well, that's, how sexy is that? Well, first off, it is pretty sexy because you want the bridge to be good, right? Right. You want to be able to go across the bridge, but when you don't realize the economic impact that not having that bridge there creates, and then the ripple effect to the communities around it, it's really awe-inspiring to know that the work we do changes lives. And
Mm.
so we're driven to care because we know that, and we want to be the best, and we want to share that back with our communities. And I think that, when we have an employee-owned company where we have created, a resilient business with sustainable business practices that's future focused, employee focused, we share those wealths, that wealth back with our employees, that value, and they in turn take that back to their communities. They're more engaged in their communities. They reinvest those economics in their communities. It's a life cycle that when you really step back from, you're a part of, and your people are a part of. And so, we're driven to care beyond, just what we see every day in our four walls, across the country where all of our offices are located, but in every community, and with every client that we also touch. It's just it's a great place to be. And I think that our people feel that. And I think that's why they're so excited about the opportunity to own a piece of what they're doing every day and then to share in those rewards with each other.
This is bringing to mind something that I just witnessed this week. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on it too, because I don't know if you've ever heard of Casa Bonita. Okay. It is an iconic restaurant here in Colorado, and
Okay.
it's featured in the South Park episode as well.
Oh
Um,
my
the
God.
creators of South Park, Matt Parker, let's see, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. They
Okay.
bought Casa Bonita, and they just had a documentary about it. And this will all make sense, I promise, because in the documentary they talk about how they went there as kids, and they're like, "Oh my God, can you just imagine owning this place someday?" Well, come full circle, and Trey Parker and Matt Stone decide to buy it, and they find out quickly that it's just they have to gut it pretty much. And so the whole documentary is talking about how they're coming into this now. They're owners. They enjoyed this place as children, dreamed of maybe owning it, haha, someday, and now they are. But they're coming in and having to witness and pay for, this place that they now own, and it's their responsibility to make it live again and bring it back up to code even, but also to make it a place that does impact people's lives. And that was the whole documentary about that. And when you're talking about RS&H, and I'm
Mhm.
thinking about that, and I'm thinking about, when you're given an opportunity to own a place, not just come and enjoy it or come and partake in it piecemeal, but you own it now. And even just in the documentary, I'm watching Trey Parker walk around like he owns the place. He does own it. And so that made me think of your employees, of the
Ah,
associates at RS&H, of
oh,
y'all can walk around like you own the place.
I love that. I love that story. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to have to steal that from you, that story, and share it with others. But that's really interesting that you say that, because that's what we say: act like you own the place, because you do. And that's, we believe that, and we can say it now more than ever as we open up ownership here in the next 2 weeks to everyone.
That's so
So
exciting.
exciting.
That's great. Well, Amy, this has been such an informative discussion. I'll confess, I didn't understand much about employee ownership going into this interview, but now I and our listeners know a lot more that we didn't know about how it works and why it's such a great aspect of RS&H. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. We so
Oh,
appreciate it.
thank you, Rachel. I really do appreciate having you on, and I could continue to talk about it. So I hope this made an impact to whoever's listening.
That's right. Me too. I'm sure it did. And thank you all for joining this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AEC Perspectives. Follow RS&H on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And remember, at RS&H, we're driven to care.